Her hands were wrenched behind her back, the cold metal of the handcuffs, a stark contrast to the warm, humid night air of the campus she was sworn to protect. The officer's voice was a low growl in her ear, accusing her of being somewhere she didn't belong, but he had no idea who he was talking to. He didn't know that the woman he was arresting for trespassing was the very person who oversaw the safety and conduct of every student in the university, and that his world was about to be turned upside down. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The soft glow of Dr. Patrice Ellis's desk lamp cast a warm, inviting circle of light in the otherwise dark office. It was a space that felt less like an administrative hub and more like a sanctuary of learning and mentorship. The walls were a testament to her life's work, lined with bookshelves overflowing with volumes on educational theory, sociology, and student development, their spines worn from frequent reference. Tucked between the serious academic texts was a vibrant collection of student artwork, a chaotic, colorful explosion of gratitude and talent. Framed photographs were scattered across her desk and shelves, capturing smiling moments with her husband and 2 teenage children, a constant, grounding reminder of the world outside the university's ivy-covered walls. The office was a reflection of Patrice herself, professional, meticulously organized, yet filled with a deep, palpable warmth and a genuine investment in the lives she touched. She leaned back in her ergonomic chair, the soft leather sighing under her weight. At 48, Patrice was dressed down, having long since shed the sharp blazer and tailored slacks of her day. Now, she wore a comfortable, well-loved Northwood University hoodie, its faded crest a badge of honor she wore with pride. Below the desk, she had on simple black yoga pants and a pair of running shoes, attire more suited for a late-night jog than for the dean of students of such a prestigious institution. A long day of back-to-back meetings, budget proposals, and student disciplinary hearings had left her weary, but it was a good kind of tired, the fulfilling exhaustion that comes from meaningful work. Her dark hair, usually styled in a professional twist, was pulled back into a simple, no-nonsense ponytail at the nape of her neck. Her gaze drifted to the large window overlooking the main quad. From her third-floor vantage point in the Albright Administration Building, the campus spread out before her like a miniature city, its pathways illuminated by the gentle glow of old-fashioned lampposts. She felt a profound sense of ownership and responsibility for this place, for the thousands of young souls navigating the tumultuous journey to adulthood within its borders. Her own journey to this office had been long and arduous, a climb up a ladder where many of the rungs had been greased by prejudice and doubt. She was acutely aware of her position, not just as an administrator, but as a visible, tangible role model for the students of color who often felt invisible in these hallowed halls. She carried the weight of their hopes and expectations on her shoulders, a responsibility that both humbled and motivated her. This little city was her charge, and she was its vigilant guardian. A soft chime from her computer pulled her from her thoughts. An email notification had popped up on her screen, its subject line stark and clinical: "Security alert, minor thefts in Emerson Hall." She clicked it open, her eyes scanning the brief bureaucratic text. It was a routine alert, detailing a series of small-scale thefts from unlocked dorm rooms, laptops, and textbooks being the primary targets. The official response was exactly what she expected: a boilerplate reminder for students to lock their doors and a promise of increased patrols. It was efficient, detached, and utterly impersonal. Something about it gnawed at her. It felt like a form letter sent to address a symptom, not a solution aimed at the cause. This was not her way. Patrice believed in a hands-on approach, in walking the ground and understanding the pulse of her campus. She couldn't just forward the email with a generic, "stay safe" message. She needed to see for herself, to feel the atmosphere in the residence hall, to understand the vulnerabilities not as data points on a report, but as tangible spaces where her students lived and studied. It was a habit forged over years of dedication, a need to connect with the reality of student life beyond the polished reports that crossed her desk. With a decisive nod, she pushed back from her desk. She'd just do a quick walkthrough of Emerson, check the common areas, and make sure the building felt secure. It would only take a few minutes. She grabbed her keys and the master keycard that granted her access to every building on campus. In a move that would soon prove to be a critical mistake, she left everything else behind. Her purse, containing her wallet, driver's license, and, most importantly, her official university faculty ID, remained tucked away in a locked desk drawer. She was just stepping out for a moment. After all, what could possibly happen? The heavy oak door of her office clicked shut behind her, the sound echoing in the cavernous silence of the empty administration building. The air inside was still and cool, a stark contrast to the humid October night waiting outside. As she stepped out into the open, the scent of freshly cut grass from the manicured lawns filled her senses, mingled with the faint, distant thumping of music from a faraway dorm party. The campus was quiet but alive, a sleeping giant breathing softly in the darkness. She walked the familiar stone pathways, her running shoes making soft, rhythmic sounds on the pavement. Emerson Hall, a freshman dorm, was on the far side of the quad. Its brick facade was dimly lit, most of its windows dark as students were either out or already asleep. Using her keycard, she let herself in, the lock beeping softly in the quiet hallway. The air inside was stuffy, smelling of stale pizza and air freshener. It was a smell that was unique to dormitories, a scent that instantly transported her back to her own undergraduate days. She moved through the ground floor hallways, her steps slow and deliberate. It was a maternal, protective act. She checked the locks on the common room doors, ensuring the expensive study equipment inside was secure. She made sure the fire exit doors were unobstructed, her mind cataloging potential safety hazards with practiced efficiency. A small, nostalgic smile touched her lips as she passed a bulletin board covered in flyers for student clubs and events. She remembered the feeling of being 18, the intoxicating mix of newfound freedom and overwhelming vulnerability that defined freshman year. These students were her kids, in a way, and she felt a fierce instinct to protect them. At the far end of a long, fluorescent-lit corridor, two figures appeared, campus police officers. One was older, with a thick build and a jaded expression that seemed permanently etched onto his face. The other was younger, leaner, with the nervous, eager-to-please energy of a rookie. They were Officer Davies and his junior partner, Officer Kent. They spotted her from a distance, a solitary figure in a hoodie and yoga pants, and their pace quickened. There was no friendly, "Hello," no casual "Evening, ma'am." Their approach was immediately confrontational, their body language radiating suspicion. They stopped a few feet from her, creating an implicit barrier. "Ma'am," Officer Davies began, his voice a low, accusatory growl that cut through the silence. "This building is for residents only. What are you doing here?" His tone wasn't inquisitive. It was an indictment. Patrice offered a calm, disarming smile, years of de-escalating tense situations with students and parents kicking in automatically. "Good evening, officers. I'm just doing a final walkthrough, making sure everything's secure for the night." Davies's eyes narrowed, sweeping over her casual attire with undisguised skepticism. "A walkthrough? Who are you?" "I'm Patrice Ellis," she said, her voice even and pleasant. "I work for the university." A dismissive, humorless chuckle escaped Davies's lips. "Doing what?" he asked, his gaze flicking down the empty hall. "The janitorial staff went home hours ago." The words landed with a sharp, stinging impact. It was a casual, almost thoughtless brand of racism, but it was no less painful for its laziness. A familiar flash of hot anger surged through Patrice's veins, a feeling she had been forced to manage her entire life. She took a slow, deliberate breath, pushing the anger down. She was the dean. She was a professional. She would handle this professionally. She had navigated a lifetime of microaggressions, of assumptions made based on the color of her skin. This was just a more direct, more ignorant version of the same old, ugly story. She would not let this man, with his tired eyes and lazy assumptions, strip her of her dignity. She straightened her spine, a subtle, almost imperceptible shift, but it was an act of profound self-possession. The fluorescent lights of the hallway seemed to buzz with a new, aggressive energy, casting long, distorted shadows that danced at the edges of her vision. The air grew thick, heavy with unspoken hostility. "As I said," Patrice began again, her voice a carefully modulated instrument of calm authority, "I'm Patrice Ellis, the Dean of Students. My office is in the Albright Administration Building. If you'll just walk with me, I can show you my identification." She made the offer reasonably, a simple solution to a simple misunderstanding. It was a bridge, extended across the chasm of his suspicion. Officer Davies shattered it with a scoff. The sound was sharp and ugly in the enclosed space, a percussive burst of contempt. "The Dean of Students," he echoed, a sneer twisting his lips. "Right, and I'm the Chancellor." He took a half-step closer, invading her personal space. His presence, a physical manifestation of his disbelief. "Look, lady, I don't have time for games. You don't have an ID. You don't live here. You're trespassing." The word hung in the air, a legal term weaponized into an insult. It was absurd, a grotesque distortion of reality. Trespassing in a building she was responsible for, on a campus that was the very heart of her professional life. The accusation was so baseless it was momentarily disorienting. His partner, Officer Kent, shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his youthful face a canvas of growing anxiety. He glanced from his partner's rigid back to Patrice's composed expression, a flicker of doubt in his eyes. "Mark," he said, his voice low and nervous, a hesitant counterpoint to Davies's bluster. "Maybe we should just walk with her, if she's telling the truth. If she's telling the truth, she should know better than to be wandering around without ID." Davies cut him off, his voice like gravel. He turned his full attention back to Patrice, his eyes narrowing into accusatory slits. He was a man who had found a narrative he liked, and he would not be deterred by facts. "We've had reports of thefts," he continued, his voice dropping with theatrical gravity. "For all I know, you're the one responsible." Leavened, the open accusation was like a physical blow. It knocked the air from her lungs, a dizzying combination of shock and white-hot indignation. This was no longer a misunderstanding. It had curdled into something far more sinister. Her professional authority, the respect she had earned through decades of hard work and dedication, was not just being questioned, it was being utterly erased. In his eyes, she was not a dean, not an educator, not a protector of this community. She was a suspect. Her heart began to pound, a frantic, panicked drumbeat against her ribs. It was a rhythm of pure indignation, but underneath it, a colder, deeper bass note of dread began to sound. She was a black woman in a hoodie, alone in a hallway with two white police officers, one of whom was determined to see her as a criminal. The power dynamics of the situation were stark, terrifying, and as old as the nation itself. She felt the carefully constructed edifice of her professional identity crumbling, leaving her exposed and vulnerable in a way she had not felt in years. Just down the hall, a door creaked open. A sliver of warm light sliced through the sterile fluorescence, and a young woman with a cascade of dark curls and inquisitive eyes peered out. Her name was Maya, a sophomore journalism major who had been cramming for a midterm, and the raised voices had broken her concentration. Her eyes widened as she took in the scene, her brain processing it with the speed of a photographer capturing a fleeting image. Two white campus cops, their postures aggressive and intimidating, cornering a black woman who looked more like a tired mom than a threat. The dynamic was instantly, depressingly familiar. It was a story she had read about, seen on the news, but had never witnessed firsthand. Her journalistic instincts, raw but sharp, took over. Without a second thought, she retreated silently back into the shadows of her doorway, her fingers fumbling for her phone. She tapped the screen, the small red circle appearing like a secret eye. For a moment, the scene played out through the shaky frame of Maya's phone. The video was raw, unedited, capturing the harsh overhead lighting and the tense, rigid backs of the two officers. Patrice's face was visible between them, a mask of tightly controlled frustration and disbelief. The audio was clear, the low hum of the building's ventilation system a constant underscore to the unfolding drama. Maya's breath was a quiet, unheard gasp. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that this was important. This was a story that needed to be told. Officer Davies, perhaps sensing a new set of eyes on him, glanced over his shoulder. He saw the sliver of light from the open door, the hint of a shadow moving within. The awareness of being watched, of being potentially recorded, did not de-escalate the situation. Instead, it was like gasoline on a fire. His authority was being challenged, not just by this defiant woman, but by the unseen, anonymous judgment of a student. He felt a surge of stubborn pride. He would not be made to look weak. He would double down. He would show them all who was in charge. Patrice saw the shift in his demeanor, the hardening of his jaw, the dangerous glint in his eyes. She had to end this now, before it spiraled completely out of control. She planted her feet, a quiet act of defiance. "Officer," she said, her voice losing its placating edge and taking on the sharp, clear tone of command she used when addressing a disruptive student assembly. "I am not trespassing. I am performing my duties as the dean of this university. You are making a serious mistake." She took a single, deliberate step, not towards him, but sideways, intending to lead the way, to force them to follow her to the administration building where this whole nightmare could be resolved. It was a calculated move, an assertion of her right to be there. Davies interpreted it as flight, as resistance, as the final confirmation of her guilt. "You're not going anywhere," he snarled, his hand shooting out and grabbing her upper arm. "You're coming with us." The sudden physical contact was a jolt, a violation that sent a shockwave through her system. His grip was hard, his fingers digging into her flesh through the soft fabric of her hoodie. The casual authority of his touch was an obscenity. Her calm finally shattered. "Take your hand off me," she snapped, her voice sharp and trembling with a fury she could no longer contain. "You have no right." "I have every right," Davies retorted, his face inches from hers. The faint, cloying scent of his cheap cologne, a mix of synthetic musk and stale coffee, filled her nostrils, making her stomach turn. "You're being detained. Now put your hands behind your back." The words were an order, a command that expected immediate, unquestioning obedience. From his belt, he unclipped a pair of handcuffs. The metallic rasp of the hinge was unnaturally loud, a zipper of sound tearing through the tense silence. From the corner of her eye, she saw the light in the dorm room doorway vanish as the door clicked softly shut, but not before she heard a sharp, audible gasp. This was it, the point of no return. A wave of pure, unadulterated humiliation washed over her, so powerful it threatened to pull her under. She was Dr. Patrice Ellis. She had advised university presidents. She had shaped institutional policy. She had mentored thousands of students, guiding them through their darkest moments. And now, she was being treated like a common criminal, manhandled and degraded in the hallway of a freshman dorm on the very campus she had dedicated her life to serving. Her mind raced, a chaotic flood of images and fears. She thought of her children, how she would explain this to them. She thought of her colleagues, the whispers and the stares. She thought of her students, the very ones she was trying to protect, and the lesson this moment would teach them about power, race, and justice at Northwood University. In that split second, as Davies's hand tightened on her arm and the cold open maw of the handcuffs beckoned, she made a choice. A part of her, the primal, angry part, wanted to fight, to scream, to resist this injustice with every fiber of her being. But the other part, the strategist, the educator, the survivor, knew better. Physical resistance would only escalate the situation. It would give him the justification he was looking for. It would put her in more danger. It would turn her from a victim of his prejudice into an aggressor in his report. With a profound, soul-crushing sense of defeat, she let her shoulders slump. She did not struggle. She did not speak. She allowed him to wrench her arms behind her back, the movement awkward and painful. The cold, unforgiving metal of the handcuffs closed around her wrists. The first cuff clicked shut, a sound of finality. Then the second. The double click echoed in the hallway, a sound that seemed to seal her fate. The metal was shockingly cold against her skin, a brutal reminder of her powerlessness. Her mind, which had been racing, went suddenly, eerily quiet. There was only the feeling of the steel biting into her wrists, and the crushing weight of a humiliation so profound it felt like a physical presence, pressing down on her, stealing the very air from her lungs. She was under arrest. The heavy glass door of Emerson Hall swung shut behind them, its hydraulic sigh seeming to exhale Patrice into a new, more public circle of hell. The walk from the sterile, fluorescent-lit hallway into the vast, open darkness of the campus quad was a jarring transition. Officer Davies propelled her forward, his grip on her arm, a proprietary vice, a physical claim of ownership. He was no longer just detaining her, he was parading her, his prize. Officer Kent trailed a few paces behind, a reluctant shadow in his partner's wake, his gaze fixed on the ground, as if he could find a crack in the pavement large enough to swallow him. This was the walk of shame, a nightmare rendered in real time. The main quad, the heart of Northwood University, was far from empty. Its crisscrossing pathways were arteries, and even at this late hour, they pulsed with life. Students, the very people Patrice had dedicated her career to, were moving through the space. A group of 4, their arms laden with textbooks and their faces etched with the fatigue of a late-night study session, emerged from the library. A couple, their hands intertwined, ambled slowly towards a residence hall, their soft laughter dying on their lips as they saw the procession. A boisterous crowd spilled out from a nearby student union building, their cheerful chatter dissolving into a confused murmur. From a discreet distance, Maya followed. Her phone was held steady now, her journalism instincts overriding any personal fear. She was no longer just a witness, she was a documentarian. Her lens captured the entire tableau. Davies's aggressive posture, Kent's miserable shuffle, and in the center of it all, Dr. Patrice Ellis, her head held unnaturally high, her hands bound behind her back. Maya's fingers flew across her screen in a separate group chat for the university's student newspaper. "Happening now," she typed, her thumbs trembling slightly. "Campus police arresting a black woman outside Emerson. They're walking her across the quad. Get down here. I'm sending video." She attached the first clip, a raw 30-second segment showing the initial confrontation in the hallway. The file uploaded, and the digital fuse was lit. Almost instantly, other phones began to appear across the quad. Small, glowing rectangles emerged from pockets and backpacks, their lenses turning towards the slow, grim parade. A small crowd began to coalesce, a loose gathering of onlookers drawn by the undeniable spectacle of authority being exerted. The low murmur of their voices was a rising tide, a mixture of confusion and outrage. The soft clicks of their phone cameras taking photos and recording videos became a new, unnerving percussion, a digital chorus of witness. The incident was no longer confined to a hallway or a private group chat. It was going viral across the campus network, spreading from phone to phone, screen to screen, a wildfire of shared indignation. Patrice kept her eyes fixed on a point in the far distance, the iconic spire of the university's clock tower. She focused on her breathing, a slow, deliberate rhythm of inhale and exhale, a fragile anchor in a swirling sea of humiliation. She would not look like a victim. She would not give Davies the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. Inside, however, her mind was a churning vortex of emotion. Shame, hot and suffocating, anger, a righteous, burning flame. But beneath it all, her administrator's brain, the cool, analytical part of her that had navigated countless crises, was already kicking in. It was a defense mechanism, a way to process the trauma by turning it into a problem to be solved. This is a teachable moment, she thought. The phrase, a grim, ironic echo of the words she had so often used in faculty meetings and student workshops. She had never, in her wildest nightmares, imagined that she would be the lesson. The weight of the moment felt immense, historical. She felt the spectral presence of countless others who had been profiled, judged, and condemned based on the color of their skin. She was one in a long, unbroken line, and the cold metal biting into her wrists was a link in a chain that stretched back for centuries. Officer Davies, however, was experiencing a completely different reality. He felt a heady surge of power, an intoxicating rush of adrenaline and self-importance. He was the law. He was order. He was making a point, demonstrating to this entire student body that no one was above the rules, not even a woman who had the audacity to claim she was a dean. He interpreted the sea of glowing phones and the murmuring crowd not as a sign of condemnation, but as a validation of his authority. They were watching him, respecting him, seeing him do the hard, necessary work of keeping their campus safe. He tightened his grip on Patrice's arm, a small, almost unconscious assertion of his dominance. Let them watch, he thought with a grim satisfaction. Let them all see what happens when you break the rules at Northwood. Kent was living in a private hell. Every glowing phone felt like a spotlight, every student's stare a personal accusation. He could feel the wrongness of this in his bones, a sour, acidic churning in his gut. This wasn't policing, it was a power trip. He had seen his partner's ego take over before, but never like this, never so publicly, so recklessly. He kept his head down, but his eyes darted nervously from side to side, catching glimpses of the students' faces. He saw their shock, their anger, and he knew that he was complicit. His silence was an endorsement. He had to try again. He quickened his pace, drawing level with his partner, and spoke in a low, urgent whisper, trying to keep his voice from the ever-present phone microphones. "Mark, this is a bad look," he pleaded, his voice barely audible over the growing noise of the crowd. "The whole campus is watching. For God's sake, look at them. Let's just take the cuffs off and take her to the admin building like she asked. We can sort it out there." Davies didn't even turn his head. His jaw was set like concrete, his eyes fixed forward. "And let her think she can walk all over us," he hissed back, his voice a venomous rasp. "No way, she broke the rules. She's getting processed. By the book. Let them watch. It's a good lesson for them." The cold finality in his partner's voice extinguished the last embers of Kent's courage. He fell back again, his shoulders slumping in defeat, the weight of his own cowardice a heavy cloak. Patrice felt every single second of the walk as a distinct, physical sensation. The cold metal of the handcuffs was a constant, biting presence, chafing her skin with every step, a relentless reminder of her captivity. The sound of the crowd was a disorienting symphony, a blend of whispers she couldn't quite make out, the sharp, distinct clicks of phone cameras, and the occasional, bolder shout of, "Let her go." From the edge of the crowd, she could feel hundreds of eyes on her, a heavy, suffocating blanket of scrutiny. She risked a glance at the faces in the crowd, a mistake that sent a fresh wave of pain through her. She saw students she recognized. There was the young man she had personally helped secure emergency funding for when his family had fallen on hard times. There was the young woman from the debate team whom she had mentored, helping her overcome her fear of public speaking. She saw their faces, a mixture of shock, confusion, and a deep, unsettling anger on her behalf. But in the eyes of some, strangers mostly, she saw something else, a disturbing flicker of morbid curiosity, even amusement. It was the look of people watching a spectacle, detached from the humanity of the person at its center. In that moment, she felt a profound and terrifying sense of alienation. She looked at the faces of the students she had fought for, the community she had nurtured, the campus she considered her second home, and she felt like a complete and utter stranger. The iconic clock tower, which had been a distant symbol of hope, now seemed to mock her, its illuminated face a cold, indifferent eye in the sky. It stood for the university's highest ideals, for knowledge, for integrity, for community. Ideals that felt like a cruel joke as she was paraded across the grass in handcuffs. She was no longer Dr. Ellis, the dean of students. She was just a black woman in a hoodie, a suspect, an object of pity and scorn, a ghost haunting her own home. The shame was a physical thing, a leaden weight in her stomach, and for the first time that night, she felt the hot, stinging prick of tears behind her eyes. She blinked them back, fiercely. She would not cry. Not here. Not in front of them. The grim procession finally reached the foot of the Albright administration building. It rose before them, not merely as a structure of brick and stone, but as a monument to the university's legacy and power, a physical embodiment of the very authority Officer Davies believed he was upholding. Grand and imposing, its neoclassical facade seemed to absorb the darkness of the night. The large, fluted columns, flanking the entrance standing like stoic, silent sentinels guarding a sacred space. The university crest, carved in a massive block of granite above the heavy glass doors, was caught in the ambient light from the quad's lampposts, a complex emblem of knowledge and integrity that felt, in this moment, like a hollow and bitter promise. Most of the building was dark, a sleeping giant at rest, but a few windows on the upper floors glowed with a soft, persistent light. One of them, Patrice knew with a certainty that twisted in her gut, belonged to the president's office. The crowd of students, which had swelled into a formidable, restless assembly of nearly 100, did not press forward. They were kept at a respectful distance by the sheer architectural authority of the place, their collective murmurs and the sea of glowing phones creating a tense, agitated energy at the edge of the manicured plaza. Officer Davies shoved Patrice roughly towards the entrance, the satisfaction radiating from him in palpable waves. He was at the finish line, about to deliver his suspect to the small campus police substation tucked away in the building's ground floor. "End of the line," he said, his voice thick with a smug finality that made Patrice's skin crawl. He reached for the large, ornate brass handle on the glass door, a conqueror planting his flag. Just as his fingers brushed against the cold metal, the door swung inward with a silent, powerful grace. The sudden movement was so unexpected that Davies flinched back, his hand recoiling as if the handle were electrified. A tall, distinguished man in his early 60s, with a mane of silver hair and a face etched with the weariness of a long day, stepped out into the night air. He held a phone to his ear, his posture slumped with fatigue. It was University President Richard Albright. His eyes, initially unfocused and tired, slowly adjusted to the scene before him. A chaotic tableau, illuminated by the harsh, intermittent flashes of phone cameras. He saw the large, agitated crowd of students first, a sight that would be alarming on any normal night. Then his gaze moved to the center of the commotion. He saw the aggressive, proprietary stance of Officer Davies. He saw the raw, abject misery on the face of the younger officer, and then he saw her. He saw the university hoodie, the exhausted but defiant posture, and the glint of metal around her wrists. His face, a moment before a mask of weary professionalism, transformed. The weariness vanished, replaced by a look of profound, uncomprehending shock. His mouth fell slightly open. "I have to call you back," he said into the phone, his voice a flat, distant monotone. He didn't bother to end the call properly, his thumb stabbing at the screen as his arm dropped to his side. He took in the full picture, the pieces clicking into place with horrifying speed. The handcuffs on his trusted colleague, the aggressive officer, the sea of recording students. The shock on his face curdled, hardening into a cold, dangerous fury. He strode forward, his powerful presence parting the charged air like the bow of a ship. The murmuring of the crowd died instantly. The silence he commanded was absolute and immediate. "Patrice?" His voice boomed, a thunderclap in the sudden stillness, echoing off the stone facade of the building. "What in God's name is going on here? Are you all right?" He didn't wait for her to answer. His eyes, blazing with a protective fire, were already locked on Officer Davies. He moved until he was standing directly in front of the officer, his taller frame casting Davies in a sudden, intimidating shadow. He lowered his voice, but it lost none of its power. It became something colder, sharper, a weapon honed to a razor's edge. "Officer," he said, the word dripping with ice. "What is the meaning of this? Why is the Dean of Students in handcuffs?" The freeze. It was not a gradual cooling, but an instantaneous, cataclysmic event, as if the temperature of the entire plaza had plunged below zero in a single heartbeat. The words, "the Dean of Students," did not simply register with Officer Davies. They detonated in his mind. They hung in the air, shimmering and terrible, each syllable a nail in the coffin of his career. His face, which had been a mask of smug authority, became a horrifying, rapid-fire slideshow of emotional collapse. First, there was blank, bovine disbelief, his brain refusing to process the information. His eyes darted from the furious president to Patrice's calm, unreadable face, searching for some sign that this was a joke, a misunderstanding of colossal proportions. Then, a wave of sickening confusion washed over him as the two identities, the trespassing janitor and the Dean of Students, collided in his head, creating a cognitive dissonance so profound it made him physically sway. This was followed by the pale, dawning light of comprehension, the moment the truth settled not just in his mind, but in the pit of his stomach, a cold, heavy stone of pure dread. And finally, all other emotions were consumed by a tidal wave of sheer, unadulterated panic. The smug confidence that had defined his every action evaporated like mist in a hurricane. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a sickly, pale-green pallor. His jaw, once set in a hard line of certainty, went slack, his mouth hanging slightly agape. The hand that had been gripping Patrice's arm with such proprietary force went limp, his fingers uncurling as if all the strength had been siphoned out of them. He looked like a man who had just watched his entire world crumble into dust at his feet. Officer Kent looked as if he was actively praying for the ground to open up and swallow him whole. He flinched as if he had been physically struck by the president's words. He squeezed his eyes shut for a brief, agonizing moment, a desperate, futile attempt to wish himself into non-existence. When he opened them, he avoided eye contact with everyone, his gaze locked on the polished tips of his own shoes as if they held the secrets to the universe. He could feel the heat of 1,000 stares, the weight of 1,000 judgments, and the crushing burden of his own cowardice. He had known, in his gut, he had known this was wrong, and he had done nothing. His silence had been his consent, and now the consequences were raining down upon them. The student crowd, which had been held in a state of suspended silence by the president's arrival, erupted. The sound was not a cheer, but a collective, explosive gasp, a unified expression of shock and vindication. The gasps were immediately followed by a frantic, excited roar of whispers. "Oh my God," he called her the Dean. "It's Dean Ellis. That cop is so fired." The phones, which had been held at waist level, were now thrust high into the air, every student jockeying for the best angle to capture the stunning, dramatic reversal. Across the plaza, Maya, her heart pounding with a mixture of journalistic triumph and righteous fury, zoomed her camera in, tightening the frame until it was filled with nothing but the utterly horrified, ghost-white face of Officer Davies. She had the money shot. President Albright, his face a mask of cold, controlled rage, took another deliberate step forward, physically placing himself between Davies and Patrice. It was a clear, unmistakable gesture, a protective barrier being erected around his colleague, and a wall of judgment before the officer. He completely ignored Davies, treating him as if he were a piece of furniture, an insignificant obstacle. His icy gaze fell instead upon the younger, trembling officer. "Officer," he said, his voice quiet but carrying the unmistakable weight of absolute authority, "remove these handcuffs. Now." The command galvanized Kent into motion, albeit a clumsy, panicked one. "Yes, sir," he stammered, his hands fumbling at his belt for the handcuff key. His fingers were slick with sweat, and they shook so violently that he could barely grasp the small piece of metal. He dropped it once, the tiny clatter on the stone plaza sounding like a gunshot in the charged silence. He snatched it up, his face burning with shame, and finally managed to approach Patrice from behind. He had to try twice to fit the key into the lock, his trembling hands betraying the storm of panic and regret raging within him. The first click of the handcuff opening was deafeningly loud. It was a sharp, metallic pop that broke the spell. The second followed a moment later. The heavy steel bracelets fell away from Patrice's wrists, and she slowly, deliberately brought her hands around to her front. Her expression was unreadable, a calm, placid lake beneath which powerful currents moved unseen. She didn't say a word. She didn't look at Kent, who was now backing away as if she were radioactive. She didn't even offer a glance to President Albright, who stood beside her like a furious guardian angel. Instead, her gaze settled on the utterly broken form of Officer Davies. She slowly, methodically, began to rub her wrists, the simple, repetitive motion drawing all eyes to the angry red marks the steel had left on her skin. She just looked at him, her silence more powerful than any scream, her calm gaze a crucible in which his authority, his pride, and his career were being melted down to slag. She let the full, crushing weight of his monumental mistake settle upon him, allowing him to drown in the consequences of his own prejudice. In her silence, power had not just shifted, it had been utterly and completely reclaimed. The thick, awkward silence that followed was a vacuum, pulling all the heat and noise from the plaza. President Albright, his face a granite mask of fury, kept a supportive, grounding hand on Patrice's shoulder. He turned his full, icy attention back to the two officers, who stood frozen in the harsh glare of the assembled phone lights, looking like startled animals caught in the headlights of an oncoming train. "Officers Davies and Kent," President Albright said, his voice deceptively quiet, yet it sliced through the air with the chilling precision of a scalpel. "My office, tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock sharp." He paused, letting the command sink in, a sentence delivered before the trial had even begun. "Do not be late." He held their gaze for another beat, a silent transfer of absolute authority, before delivering the final, dismissive verdict. "Now, leave." Officer Davies, his face a mess of sweat and panicked confusion, finally found his voice, though it was a pathetic, stammering wreck of what it had been moments before. "Sir, there was a report," he began, his words tumbling out, a desperate, fumbling attempt to build a wall of justification brick by pathetic brick. "Of thefts. She had no ID. I was following procedure." President Albright did not even grace the excuse with a direct response. His eyes, cold and hard as diamonds, remained fixed on Davies. He repeated his earlier command, his voice dropping even lower, imbued with a terrifying finality that promised dire consequences. "I said, leave." That was the final blow. The two officers practically fled. They turned in a clumsy, uncoordinated shuffle, not daring to look at each other, their shared disgrace a palpable barrier between them. The large crowd of students, which had been a solid, unmoving wall of witnesses, parted for them as if they were lepers. The parting was not silent. A wave of jeers and derisive laughter followed them, a soundtrack to their humiliation. Some students just shook their heads, their expressions a mixture of disgust and disbelief. Davies and Kent scurried away into the darkness, their hurried footsteps a frantic retreat from the scene of their career's implosion, the weight of 1,000 judging eyes pressing down on their backs. President Albright watched them go, his expression unyielding until they were swallowed by the shadows beyond the quad. Only then did he allow his posture to soften. The furious university president receded, and the concerned friend and colleague emerged. He turned to Patrice, his eyes filled with a deep, genuine sorrow. "Come on," he said gently, his hand moving from her shoulder to the small of her back, guiding her towards the now open doors of the administration building. "Let's get you inside." He ushered her into the vast, silent lobby. The contrast with the chaotic energy outside was immediate and profound. Here, the air was cool and still, smelling faintly of floor polish and old paper. The only sound was the soft, distant hum of the building's climate control system. The marble floors, polished to a mirror shine, reflected the dim, recessed lighting, creating an atmosphere of serene, monastic quiet. It was a space designed to inspire awe and respect, but tonight it felt like a sanctuary, a quiet harbor after a brutal storm. President Albright led her past the imposing reception desk to a small, secluded sitting area furnished with plush, dark leather armchairs and a low mahogany table. "Sit, Patrice," he urged, his voice soft. He waited until she had sunk into the deep, comforting embrace of the armchair before walking over to a small, discreetly placed water cooler. He returned with a paper cup of cold water, his movements efficient and solicitous. His demeanor had completely transformed. The icy, authoritative leader who had just dismantled 2 police officers with a few quiet words was gone, replaced by a man whose face was etched with profound concern and a simmering, personal anger. "Patrice, I am so sorry," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he rarely showed. He handed her the water, his fingers brushing hers. "There are no words. There are simply no words to describe how utterly, fundamentally wrong this is. Are you physically hurt? Did they harm you?" Patrice took a long, slow sip of the water. The cold liquid was a shock to her system, a small, grounding sensation in the swirling chaos of her thoughts. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the ordeal, that had kept her head high and her voice steady, was beginning to fade, leaving behind a deep, bone-aching weariness. "I'm fine, Richard," she said, her voice raspy, the words feeling foreign in her own mouth. She took a deep, shuddering breath, the first she felt she had truly taken since this all began. "I'm not hurt, just humiliated and angry." She looked up at him, her eyes, which had remained so stoic and unreadable, now shimmering with the unshed tears of rage and shame. "Very, very angry." "You have every right to be," he said, pulling another armchair closer and sitting opposite her, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, creating an intimate circle of confidence. "You have every right to be furious. This is unacceptable. It's a failure on every conceivable level, a stain on this university. I want you to tell me exactly what happened, from the very beginning. Don't leave anything out." "And so," she told him. The story spilled out of her, not in a torrent, but in a steady, controlled narrative. Her voice, though quiet, was filled with the raw, suppressed emotion of the past hour. She started in her office, with the security email that had gnawed at her sense of duty. She described her decision to walk the halls of Emerson, her critical, fateful mistake of leaving her ID behind. She recounted the initial confrontation, the immediate, unprovoked suspicion in Officer Davies's eyes, his tone not of inquiry but of accusation. She detailed his casual racist assumption that she must be part of the janitorial staff, a remark that had been the first clear signal of the prejudice that would define the entire encounter. As she spoke, the full, crushing weight of the event finally settled upon her. Recounting the details, articulating the escalating series of aggressions, forced her to relive it, not as a chaotic series of events, but as a linear, deliberate progression of injustice. She described her calm offer to retrieve her ID, and Davies's contemptuous dismissal of her identity, his sneering, "And I'm the Chancellor." She explained how he had twisted her presence into a confirmation of guilt, accusing her of being the very thief the security alert had warned about. The sting of tears pricked at the back of her eyes again, hot and sharp, but she held them back with a force of will that felt monumental. She would not break down. She was not just a victim of a simple misunderstanding, she was a target. Her casual clothes, her presence in a dorm, and the color of her skin had been woven together in Davies's mind to create a narrative of criminality that no truth, no title, could penetrate. She described the moment he grabbed her arm, the shock of the physical violation, the smell of his cheap cologne, the terrifying finality of the handcuffs clicking shut. As she spoke these last words, her voice, which had been so steady, finally faltered, cracking under the weight of the memory. She looked down at her wrists, at the angry red welts that were already beginning to darken into bruises. They were a physical testament to the humiliation, a brand of shame left on her skin. President Albright listened with an intensity that was almost frightening. He did not interrupt. He did not move. His hands, which had been resting on his knees, slowly clenched into tight, white-knuckled fists. A muscle jumped in his jaw, a visible manifestation of the fury building within him. His face, which had been filled with concern, hardened again into a mask of cold, resolute anger. With every word Patrice spoke, his anger grew, a slow-burning fire being stoked into an inferno. When she finally fell silent, the quiet in the lobby felt heavy, charged with the unspoken violence of what she had just described. He waited a long moment before speaking, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "This isn't just about one officer's catastrophic failure of judgment, Patrice," he said, his eyes boring into hers. "This is systemic. It's a cancer we've allowed to fester in our own security department. It's the rot of implicit bias, of lazy, prejudiced thinking that we preach against in our lecture halls but have failed to eradicate from our own institution." He leaned back, running a hand through his silver hair in a gesture of profound frustration. "We will deal with Davies. His career at this university is over, I can promise you that. But that's not enough. That's never enough. Firing him is treating a symptom. We have to go after the root cause." He leaned forward again, his expression one of absolute, unwavering resolve. "Whatever you need, Patrice, whatever you want to do, the university will back you 100%. A lawsuit, a public statement, a complete overhaul of the department, you name it. You will have my full, unequivocal support, and all the resources of this institution at your disposal." While this solemn promise was being made in the quiet lobby, a digital storm was gathering. Miles away, in her dorm room, Maya sat on her bed, her laptop open, her heart still pounding. She had watched the entire scene unfold from her window, her phone capturing the final dramatic moments of the president's intervention. She quickly edited the clips together, a raw, chronological narrative of the night's events. She added a simple, devastatingly effective caption: "Campus police arrest black woman for trespassing. Turns out she's the dean of students." With a trembling finger, she clicked post. The video didn't just spread, it detonated. It exploded across the campus social media ecosystem, shared on Instagram stories, retweeted with furious captions, and posted in every student group on Facebook. It was a digital tidal wave, cresting in minutes. From there, it leaped the campus walls. Students sent it to their parents, to friends at other universities, and, most critically, to local news outlets. The phone in the newsroom of the city's largest television station began to ring, then another. An intern, scrolling through Twitter to find trending local stories, saw the video and shouted for his producer. Within an hour, the story was the lead item on 3 local news websites. By morning, it would be on CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News. The story of the dean in handcuffs was no longer a campus incident. It was rapidly becoming a national headline, a flashpoint in the ongoing painful conversation about race and policing in America. In the university's public relations department, the on-call media officer's phone began to vibrate, a frantic, insistent buzzing that signaled the beginning of a long and difficult night. The university, which had just been a quiet institution of higher learning, was now at the center of a full-blown crisis, and the world was watching. The next morning, Patrice's office, once a sanctuary of quiet contemplation, had become the command center for a crisis she never sought. The warm, inviting space was now charged with a frantic, electric energy. Her phone, set to silent, vibrated incessantly on the corner of her desk, the screen a constant, strobing cascade of notifications from numbers she didn't recognize. Her email inbox was a digital avalanche, an impossible torrent of messages from students, faculty, alumni, parents, and strangers from across the country. Their subject lines were a chaotic chorus of outrage, support, and unsolicited advice. On a large monitor mounted to the wall, a national news channel played on mute, a chyron at the bottom of the screen displaying her name next to the words, "Dean arrested on own campus." Her own face, a grainy still from Maya's video, stared back at her, a ghost at her own feast of notoriety. She had a choice to make, a critical decision that would define the narrative of this entire ordeal. The path of righteous indignation was wide open, paved for her by the fury of the public. She could demand the immediate termination of both officers. She could file a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against the university for the gross negligence of its employees, a suit her lawyers assured her she would win. She could focus on punitive measures, on making an example of the men who had humiliated her, and no one would blame her. The anger was still there, a hot, simmering coal in her chest, and a part of her, the wounded part, yearned for that simple, satisfying retribution. But as her eyes drifted away from the screen, they fell upon the familiar comforts of her office. She saw the vibrant, chaotic student artwork tacked to her bulletin board, the worn spines of her books on restorative justice and community building, the smiling faces of her family in their silver frames. This office, this life, was not built on retribution. It was built on education. Her role, her very purpose, was not to punish, but to teach. She realized, with a clarity that cut through the noise, that this was the single most important, most painful, and most potent teachable moment of her entire career. To focus only on firing the officers would be to treat the symptom, not the disease. It would be a temporary balm on a deep, systemic wound. Her responsibility as an educator, as a leader, demanded more. It demanded that she use this ugly, painful incident as a catalyst for real, lasting, institutional change. Instead of calling a press conference or releasing a statement drafted by the university's frantic public relations team, Patrice announced a campus-wide forum. It was to be held the following evening in the main university auditorium, and the topic was simple yet profound: community, safety, and bias at Northwood. She personally invited students, faculty, staff, and pointedly, the entire campus police department to attend and to speak. The auditorium was packed to the rafters, a standing room-only crowd that spilled out into the aisles and doorways. The atmosphere was thick with a tense, emotional energy, a mixture of anger, solidarity, and raw curiosity. In the front row, a seat reserved for her by the student government, sat Maya. No longer just an anonymous witness behind a phone, she was now a campus celebrity, the student journalist who had broken the story that was shaking the institution to its core. When Patrice walked onto the stage, the entire auditorium rose to its feet, a thunderous, sustained ovation that washed over her in a powerful wave. She stood at the podium, waiting for the applause to subside, her heart pounding not with fear, but with a profound sense of purpose. She looked out at the sea of faces, young and old, black and white and brown, and she began to speak. She did not just recount her story of humiliation. They had all seen the video. Instead, she used her experience as a case study, a lens through which to examine a much larger, more insidious problem. "What happened to me 2 nights ago," she began, her voice clear and steady, resonating through the vast hall, "was not just an attack on my dignity. It was not just an assault on me as an individual. It was a symptom of a deeper illness, a failure of the imagination and empathy that we, as an institution of higher learning, are supposed to champion." She spoke about the insidious nature of implicit bias, how assumptions and stereotypes can fester in the dark, shaping actions and twisting perceptions. "The officer who arrested me did not see a dean. He did not see an educator, a mother, a member of this community. He saw a hoodie, and he saw the color of my skin, and from that, he constructed a narrative of threat. He saw a criminal where he should have seen a colleague." The crowd was silent, hanging on her every word. "We can be angry. We have a right to be angry," she continued, her voice rising with passion. "But anger, without action, is a fire that consumes itself. We can demand that officers be fired, and perhaps they will be. But that doesn't fire the bias that trained them. That doesn't fire the culture that allowed their prejudice to go unchecked. We need to do more. We need to be better. We need to rebuild the very foundation of trust between this community and the people who are sworn to protect it." The next morning, the air in President Albright's office was thick with the ghosts of the previous 48 hours. Patrice and Albright sat on one side of the large mahogany conference table. On the other side sat Officer Davies and Officer Kent, their uniforms looking stiff and ill-fitting, their faces pale and drawn. Davies spoke first, his voice a low, defeated mumble, his eyes fixed on the polished surface of the table. He apologized profusely, but his words were laced with the poison of excuses. "We were on high alert, sir, Dean Ellis," he stammered. "There had been thefts. It was dark. She wasn't wearing anything to identify herself. I made a mistake in judgment." Patrice listened, her expression unreadable. When he finished, she responded, her voice quiet but firm. "A mistake is forgetting to lock your car, officer. A mistake is taking the wrong turn on your way to work. What you did was not a mistake, it was a series of choices. You chose to approach me with suspicion instead of curiosity. You chose to dismiss my words and my identity. You chose to escalate the situation. You chose to put your hands on me, and you chose to arrest me. Those were choices, Officer Davies, not mistakes." Then, Officer Kent looked up. For the first time, he looked directly at Patrice, and his eyes were filled with a raw, genuine shame. "Dean Ellis," he said, his voice cracking with an emotion that was clearly unfeigned. "There is no excuse for what happened. There is no justification for my part in it. I knew it was wrong. I felt it in my gut from the moment we approached you, and I didn't do enough to stop it. My silence made me complicit. My cowardice allowed it to happen. I failed you. I failed this community. And I failed my oath as an officer. I am truly, deeply sorry." Patrice held his gaze, seeing the profound remorse in his eyes. She gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. "Thank you, Officer Kent," she said softly. "Your apology is a start. The real apology will be in your actions moving forward." She then turned her gaze back to Davies, her expression hardening once more. "You, Officer Davies, chose to see a threat instead of a person. There is nothing more to say." The resolution was swift and decisive. Faced with a full internal investigation and the certainty of his termination, Officer Davies resigned from the force by the end of the week. Officer Kent was placed on a 6-month probationary period, assigned to administrative duty, and was required to not only attend but help facilitate the new training programs. Patrice, with the full financial and institutional backing of the university, used the momentum from the forum to enact sweeping changes. She hired a nationally renowned consulting firm that specialized in de-escalation techniques, cultural competency, and implicit bias training for law enforcement. The training was made mandatory for every single member of the campus police department, from the chief down to the newest recruit. She spearheaded the formation of a new student-faculty oversight committee for campus safety, a permanent body with the power to review complaints, analyze patrol data, and make policy recommendations directly to the president's office. She nominated Maya, the student who had filmed the incident, to be its first student co-chair, and in a move that sent a powerful message through the entire institution, the unedited video of her arrest, in all its raw and painful detail, became a permanent part of the onboarding curriculum for all new campus police hires, a stark and unavoidable lesson in the human cost of failure. Months passed. The national news crews left, the social media outrage faded to a low hum, and the campus settled into the rhythm of a new semester. It was a sunny afternoon in late April, the quad alive with the vibrant energy of spring. Patrice was walking back to her office from a lunch meeting, her professional attire a stark contrast to the hoodie she had worn on that fateful night. A group of students, including Maya, saw her and waved, their greetings warm and familiar. "Hi, Dean Ellis," they called out, their voices filled with a respect that felt deeper and more earned than ever before. Across the quad, Officer Kent was on patrol. He was walking his beat, but there was a difference in his posture. The rigid, militaristic bearing was gone, replaced by a more open, approachable demeanor. He was talking to a group of students, not standing over them, but listening to them, a small smile on his face. He saw Patrice, and their eyes met across the grass. The smile faded from his face, replaced by a look of sober respect. He stopped his conversation and gave her a slow, deliberate nod. It was a simple gesture, but it was freighted with the weight of everything that had happened. It was an acknowledgement, an apology, and a promise, all in one. Patrice held his gaze for a long moment, and then she returned the nod. The incident had left a scar, not just on her wrists, but on the heart of the community. But as she looked out over the campus, at the students laughing on the grass, at the officer engaging with them in a new and better way, she knew that from that wound, something stronger, something more resilient, had begun to grow. She had not just cleared her name or saved her reputation. She had forced her community to confront its own ugliest reflections and to begin the hard, necessary work of becoming better. She had reshaped her home, proving that the courage of one person in the face of a profound injustice can, in fact, illuminate the path toward a more understanding and more just world. A genuine smile touched her lips as she continued her walk, her gaze sweeping across the campus she had fought for, the campus she had transformed, the campus that was, finally, truly, her own.